On the 27th of March, 1886, in a canyon about 12 miles south of the Mexican border, Geronimo agreed to surrender. General George Crook had the terms. A photographer named Camillus Fly had hauled his camera into the middle of an active war zone and was taking pictures while the talking happened, which is why you can still look at the faces from that meeting. 2 nights later, Geronimo was gone. He walked back into the mountains with about 40 people, and that single night cost Crook his command in Arizona and put 5,000 soldiers into the field. Here is what those 5,000 men were chasing. When it ended in September, the group that came in numbered 16 men, 14 women, and 6 children. 36 people. Add 500 Apache scouts on the American payroll and roughly 3,000 Mexican troops working the other side of the line, and the arithmetic stops making sense. Nobody caught them. Not Crook, not Miles, not one column in the field. So what finished it? That question is the whole reason I wanted to do this one, and I will get you a straight answer to it by the end, because the answer is not a battle, and it is not really in Arizona at all. The surrender reports call him a chief. So do the newspapers, and so do most of the films. He was not one. The hereditary leader riding with him the entire time was Naiche, the younger son of Cochise, and Naiche barely appears in the popular version at all. Geronimo led a following, not a people. He was a war leader of the Bedonkohe band, and inside Apache society, he was known for something the army had no column for. His people believed he had power, a sense of what was coming, where the soldiers were, when to move. Whatever you make of that, it shows up in the record as a practical thing. Men went with him into places where the odds looked terrible and kept coming back out. His war with Mexico started before the American army had any real presence in the region. He was a young man camped near Llanos in Chihuahua, and the men were in town trading when Mexican troops under Colonel Jose Maria Carrasco struck the camp. His mother, his wife Alope, and their 3 children did not survive it. He dictated his own account of that day 50 years later and put it in 1858. Historians put it in 1851 because the Carrasco campaign is documented and dated. Most of what we have from him personally comes through that same late memory, filtered by a translator and an editor working under army supervision. Even the name is Mexican. His Apache name was Goyathle, usually given as the one who yawns. Where Geronimo came from has never been settled. The story you hear most has Mexican soldiers calling on Saint Jerome during a fight and the sound sticking, and nobody has ever produced a document for it. By the 1870s, the fight had a different shape. Cochise made peace in 1872, and the Chiricahua got a reservation in their own country, sitting on the border. Cochise was gone by 1874. 2 years after that, Washington closed the reservation and ordered the Chiricahua moved to San Carlos, roughly 180 miles north. San Carlos was a river bottom on the Gila where summer heat ran past 100 degrees and the water made people sick. Mountain people were being told to live on flat ground with no game, no timber, and rations that arrived late and short. In 1877, the agent John Clum arrested Geronimo at Ojo Caliente in New Mexico, put him in irons, and hauled him to San Carlos in a wagon. He was held a few months and released without charges. 9 years later, when American officers offered him safe conduct in writing, he had that wagon ride to measure the offer against. The break came in 1881, and it started with a religious revival. A white mountain Apache holy man named Nokai Detklina was drawing crowds with dances that promised the return of leaders already gone. The army decided he needed arresting. At Sibique Creek, the arrest turned into a fight, and part of the Apache scout company turned on the soldiers they were serving alongside. That had never happened before. Troops moved into San Carlos. Word went around that the leaders were about to be seized, and in September, Geronimo, Ewer, and Naiche left with about 74 people. 6 months later, they came back for the rest. In April 1882, Geronimo's group rode into San Carlos and pulled Loco's band off the reservation. Several hundred people, some willing and some very much not. The army chased them south. Mexican infantry under Lieutenant Colonel Lorenzo Garcia was waiting near Aliso Creek and hit the column while it was strung out and exhausted. How many people the Chiricahua lost there depends entirely on which report you read. And the Mexican and American figures do not agree with each other or with the Apache accounts collected decades afterwards. The Sierra Madre Occidental runs south from the border for hundreds of miles, a stack of ridges cut by canyons 2,000 and 3,000 feet deep. No roads, no usable maps. A Chiricahua group moved with nothing that could not be picked up in 5 minutes, kept caches of ammunition and food in places only they knew, and could take fresh horses along the way, or abandon horses entirely and go where a mounted column could not. Figures of 40 to 70 miles in a day turn up repeatedly in army reports, though it is worth remembering those numbers were written by officers explaining why they had failed to catch anyone. A cavalry troop needed a pack train. The pack train needed water and grass every night. The border worked like a piece of equipment. American troops could not legally cross, so the line was a door that closed behind anyone who reached it. That changed in 1882, when the two governments signed a reciprocal crossing agreement allowing troops to follow a trail over the line in hot pursuit. George Crook came back to command Arizona in September 1882, and he had reached a conclusion his own officers found insulting. Regular soldiers were not going to catch Apaches. Apaches might. In May 1883, he went into the Sierra Madre with about 45 soldiers, and by his own report, 193 Apache scouts under Captain Emmett Crawford and the Chief of Scouts, Al Sieber. The scouts found camps no white officer had ever laid eyes on. Nobody was dragged out at gunpoint. Crook talked, and over the following months, the bands drifted north. Geronimo came in last, in March 1884, driving a herd of cattle he had collected in Mexico on the way. The army confiscated the herd and paid the Mexican owners for it. He considered that a theft and said so for the next 20 years. They were settled at Turkey Creek near Fort Apache, pine country at 5,000 feet, and for about a year it held. If this is the kind of history you want more of, built from the reports rather than from the films, the subscribe button is worth pressing on the way past, and then we can get to the part where a year of peace came apart over a corn drink. Lieutenant Britton Davis ran the camp with 2 orders from above. No Tiswin, the weak corn beer that had been part of Apache life for generations, and no beating of wives. On the 14th of May, 1885, a large group came to Davis after a night of Tiswin and told him plainly that they had all been drinking, so he could arrest all of them or none. Davis had years of army training and nothing in it for the situation where everyone confesses at once. He telegraphed Crook for instructions. The message reached Captain Francis Pierce at San Carlos, who showed it to Sieber, who said it was just another Tiswin row, and went back to bed. Pierce never forwarded it. Crook, the one man in Arizona who might have talked them down, never saw it. 3 days later they left. Around 35 men, 8 boys close to fighting age, and roughly 100 women and children. From Turkey Creek to the border is about 120 miles of broken country. They cut the telegraph wire behind them and tied the ends back together with rawhide so the break would be hard to find. What followed was 18 months of arriving somewhere 3 days late. Crawford took scout companies deep into Sonora through the winter. On the 11th of January, 1886, his command was camped in the Espinosa del Diablo when Mexican militia opened fire, apparently taking his Apache scouts for hostiles. Crawford went out in front, waving them off, and was hit. He did not survive. Lieutenant Marion Mouse brought the column home, and he brought a message with him. Geronimo would talk to Crook in person.
That put them in the Cañon de los Embudos in March, 12 miles below the border. Fly's camera on a tripod, the terms on the table. 2 years of confinement in the East, families going with them, then a return home. Geronimo accepted on the 27th. Crook rode ahead to Fort Bowie to send the telegram. On the night of the 28th, a trader named Bob Triboulet turned up at the camp with whiskey and, so the story goes, the useful news that the men would be strung up the moment they crossed the line. Triboulet appears in several officers' accounts, all written afterwards by men who needed to explain how a signed surrender evaporated overnight. What is certain is the outcome. Geronimo, Naiche, and about 38 others walked into the dark. Chihuahua and roughly 77 people went on to Fort Bowie and boarded the train east. Washington reacted inside a day. General Philip Sheridan wired that only unconditional surrender was acceptable and that Crook's scouts clearly could not be trusted. Crook had built his whole method on those scouts and asked to be relieved. Nelson Miles took command of the Department of Arizona on the 12th of April, 1886, with orders to finish it by force. Miles built something genuinely modern. 5,000 soldiers spread across southern Arizona and New Mexico. That figure comes from his own reporting, and it covers everyone in the department, cooks and teamsters, and men on garrison duty included, so the number actually working the mountains on any given day was a great deal smaller. It is still a serious share of what the country had. The entire standing army of the United States of America ran to something like 26,000 men that year. 27 heliograph stations on mountain peaks, mirrors flashing Morse from summit to summit. The network worked as a network. It moved thousands of messages that summer, some of them across 200 miles in a few hours, and Miles praised it warmly in his own report afterwards. It also never once put troops in front of the people they were looking for. Officers who spent that summer in the field rated its contribution to the actual pursuit at close to nothing, and the two assessments have been arguing with each other in the literature ever since. Captain Henry Lawton's column chased through the Sierra Madre for 5 months in summer heat. In July, his men did find a camp on the Yaqui River and took it, along with the food and the horses. The people were somewhere else by the time the soldiers walked in, which is how nearly every contact in this campaign went. Lawton wore out his horses and most of his footwear. His surgeon, a young officer named Leonard Wood, ended up marching infantry on foot for weeks and later became chief of staff of the army. He never caught anyone either. So Miles went quietly back to Crook's method. He sent Lieutenant Charles Gatewood, who spoke some Apache and had worked with these bands for years, into Mexico with 2 Chiricahua men, Cayeta and Martin, who agreed to go in and find the camp. 2 men, unarmed, walking into a position that 5,000 soldiers had spent the summer failing to locate. While that was being arranged, Miles was pushing something else. In July, he recommended that the entire Chiricahua population still living quietly at Fort Apache be removed from the territory. President Grover Cleveland approved it. Close to 400 people who had done nothing at all, farmers and elders and children, plus the families of the men still out, plus the scouts who had been drawing army pay, were ordered onto trains for Florida. In late August, in the Bavispe River Valley in Sonora, Gatewood got his meeting. He laid out Miles's terms, harder than Crook's. Surrender, go to Florida with your families, the president decides the rest later.
By Gatewood's account, and his memoir written years later is most of what we have for that conversation, Geronimo's first question was not about terms at all. He wanted to know what would happen to his people at Fort Apache. Gatewood told him they were already gone. Strictly speaking, that ran ahead of the facts. The last group left Holbrook by train on the 7th of September, 3 days after the surrender. Whether Gatewood knew that or was repeating what he had been told, the conversation changed at that point and did not change back. The Sierra Madre only worked as a refuge while there was something in the north to come back out for.
On the 4th of September, 1886, at Skeleton Canyon in Arizona Territory, Geronimo handed his rifle to Nelson Miles. 16 men, 14 women, 6 children. Within days, they were on a train at Bowie Station, heading east, and by several accounts, the post musicians played them out with Auld Lang Syne. Caïta and Martin, who had walked into that camp unarmed and ended a war 5,000 soldiers had not ended, were put on the same train. Chatto, a scout trusted enough that he had just been to Washington and been handed a silver medal for his service, was picked up on the return journey and shipped east with everyone else. He kept the medal. Photographs of him wearing it as a prisoner of war are still in the collections. Florida first, at Fort Marion and Fort Pickens. Fort Marion was an old Spanish coastal work built to hold a garrison, and by the winter it had several hundred Chiricahua inside it, living in tents pitched on the gun deck. The damp went through people from a dry mountain climate like an illness in itself. Mount Vernon Barracks in Alabama in 1888. Fort Sill in Oklahoma in 1894. The children went separately to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania, and of the more than 100 Chiricahua children sent there, dozens never came home. Geronimo spent his last years being displayed. He sold photographs of himself and bows at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. He rode in Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade in March 1905, and afterwards asked the president to let his people go back to Arizona. Roosevelt said no, and said why. The people of Arizona would not have them. His life ended at Fort Sill in February 1909, still legally a prisoner of war, having never seen his own country again. Which brings me back to the question. 2 things kept that group out of reach, and neither of them is mysterious. The country did most of it, and after that, the pace, because a group carrying nothing outruns a column carrying everything. What the army had that actually worked was other Chiricahua, which Crook demonstrated in 1883 and Miles admitted without saying so in 1886. But the pursuit did not end the war. A recommendation from Miles in July and a signature from Cleveland did, by removing every person in Arizona that surrender was supposed to protect. He came in because there was no longer anything on the other side of it. The Chiricahua were held as prisoners of war for 27 years. In 1913, the survivors were offered a choice between staying in Oklahoma and moving to the Mescalero Reservation in New Mexico. Roughly 2/3 took New Mexico, which was closer to home without being home. The scouts came off the list on the same day as the men they had tracked.
Naiche, who had been the actual chief through the whole of it, and who almost nobody outside Apache country can name, chose Mescalero and lived there until 1919. The name went the other way. In 1940, a paratrooper at Fort Benning shouted it out of an aircraft door to show he was not frightened, and the whole army picked it up, which is roughly the opposite of what happened to the man. The thing I keep turning over is Crook. He offered 2 years and got a signature. Sheridan overruled him. The war ran another 6 months, and the terms Geronimo finally took were worse for everybody in it, including the scouts. Was Crook right? Or was an officer in the field never going to be allowed to make that deal in the first place? Tell me below, because I go back and forth on it, depending on which report I read last. And if you want the next one, the frontier has no shortage of stories where the paperwork beats the legend. Subscribe, and I will see you there.